Hey guys, Cade Jedi Master here. Happy New Year. It has been quite a while since you guys last heard from me, but I'm glad to be back for my first video of 2023, my Super Smash Bros. 6 roster explanation, or my explanation for my roster for the next Super Smash Bros., depending on what they end up calling it. So before I get started, I want to go ahead and give a shout out to Sniping is Fun. He recently made a video, his top 10 most wanted newcomers for the next Super Smash Bros. Perfect timing. Seeing Sniping is Fun. This video made me really happy to see fellow speculators from the SSB4 era talking about the next Smash Bros. So I just want to give him a shout out and encourage you guys to check out his video from a few weeks ago. So as a disclaimer, this roster is based entirely on my opinion on how I would create the roster, and this is not any more valid than how someone else would go about creating the roster. I am not Masahiro Sakurai, and I don't know how he will go about selecting characters in SSB6, assuming he even returns for it if and when it is developed. So my biggest regret about the whole SSB4 speculation between 2010 and 2014 was how competitive and aggressive it got towards the end. A lot of people, and I'm including myself in this, would get into really petty arguments about who deserved to be in the next game, and we would shut down each other's character ideas. We had a lot of fan rules, like only one character per third-party company when it came to third-party characters. The whole infamous 2 samurai rule, you can't include both Takamaru and Samurai Goro on the roster because their movesets would be too similar. Or all the arguments about which Fire Emblem character should be in the game. Just really petty arguments. Just remember, when making rosters and discussing characters, don't take it too seriously. We don't know what's going to be in the next game. The whole point of Smash speculation is to share character ideas and, most importantly, have fun. It's just a game. So of course, here's my roster. It has 100 characters total, 82 veterans and 18 newcomers. And which I know a lot of people are going to take issue with that off the bat. The prevailing opinion right now within the Smash fan base is that with the next game, they are going to significantly cut down on the roster. We're going to see less characters than we did in Ultimate, and they're effectively going to reboot the series. And this opinion really comes from a recent interview that Masahiro Sakurai had with The Verge. I believe it was a year ago. And here's what he said when he was asked about returning for another Smash Bros. Game and how his role would be. Here's what he said. "I think we've reached the limit, at least in terms of volume of content and fighters. Basically, if I were to have the opportunity to work on another Super Smash Bros. Game, that means we would have to shrink the roster, but we need to think about whether fans would be pleased about that." And people are taking this quote to mean that the next roster is most likely going to be much smaller than it was in Ultimate. Here's what I have to say about that. So Sakurai has actually made similar comments in the past, specifically early in SSB4's development. In 2012, he actually had an interview with Nintendo Power, when Nintendo Power was still a thing, regarding the development of what would eventually become known as Super Smash Bros. For Nintendo 3DS and Wii U. He said at the time, "It isn't a matter of if the next game has 50 characters, that'll be enough. There is a certain charm to games that have huge casts of playable characters, but they tend to have issues with game balance, and it becomes very difficult to fine-tune each character and have them all feel distinctive. In terms of quantity, we've probably already reached the limit of what's feasible. I think a change of direction may be what's needed." That's what he said in 2012 regarding SSB4. And I remember at the time in the SSB4 speculation community, a lot of speculators took it to mean that Smash 4's roster wasn't going to be that much bigger than Brawl's, that 40 characters was probably the limit, and a lot of people took it to heart. Ultimately, that wasn't the case. We still had a pretty not a super significant jump in the roster, but we still went from 39 playable characters to about 51 playable characters. Of course, a few characters got cut along the way, but we still got, I think, a total of like 14 or 15 newcomers in SSB4, which is still a pretty significant amount. So my take ultimately is that take interviews with a grain of salt. Just because Sakurai said that they would probably have to shrink the roster doesn't mean that will absolutely be the case. Nothing is set in stone. What he said is what he felt at the time. but things end up being a lot different once they actually hit the development floor. So take it with a grain of salt. Nothing's set in stone regarding roster size. So for now, my philosophy is the bigger the roster, the better. Keep roster cuts to a minimum and add a reasonable amount of newcomers. Hence I'm only going up from 89 to 100 characters. So, which I think is definitely still feasible because this will most likely come on Nintendo's next console. So I think it's feasible, me personally. But of course, I'm not a game developer, so I really don't know. So this is a base roster. This does not include any potential DLC. The reason I do that is because DLC is kind of an afterthought when it comes to the base roster. The base roster is made with representation in mind, how many characters per franchise, and then DLC, representation doesn't really matter as much. They're just adding who are the most popular characters. I'll go more into who I think are good potential DLC characters. But for now, I'm just focusing on the base roster, what's going to be available at launch. So my whole process in creating this roster, I feel like all characters from the original are safe. All the characters from Melee who have never been cut are safe. And all the characters from Brawl who have never been cut are safe. I also consider the Ice Climbers safe. The only reason they were cut in the Wii U and 3DS games was because of development issues on the 3DS. So otherwise, I think had the development issues not occurred, I think they definitely would have been back in SSB4. I also consider the newcomers from SSB4 who are available at launch to also be safe. As for characters who are cut, I originally planned on cutting all the Echo Fighters and just focus on unique characters. But I ultimately decided against that. The reason why, and I'll get into this more with the Metroid roster, but as you can see, I have 5 Metroid characters, and I added Sylux. Originally, I had planned on cutting Dark Samus and was going to add Sylux and was going to have just 4 Metroid characters. And it really felt weird to me to include Sylux but not include Dark Samus. So my philosophy regarding character representation representing the certain franchises, I'm not in the camp of only include the most recurring characters, don't include one-off characters, or who are the 5 most important Metroid characters, include those. I'm more in the camp of you want to have your bases covered first, and then you can kind of go all crazy with characters who would be cool or fun to play as. We have already seen this like with the Mario franchise. They have their bases covered with Mario, Luigi, Peach, and Bowser, the 4 most important Super Mario characters, the characters you absolutely have to include. And all the newcomers since then have just been really fun characters to play as, like Rosalina and Bowser Jr. I just felt like it'd be really weird to include Sylux without Dark Samus, considering that Dark Samus is Metroid Prime, is the namesake of the Metroid Prime trilogy, soon to be quadrilogy whenever Metroid Prime 4 finally comes out. I just felt like it would be really weird to include Sylux without having all of Metroid's bases covered. That led to me keeping Dark Samus, but just keeping all the most of the Echo Fighters. The only one I ended up cutting was Chrom, because I cut Roy, which I'll get into more later. And just realistically, I don't think Echo Fighters are going anywhere. Echo Fighters I do think are a good way to beef up the roster. They did that with Melee. They didn't really do it as much with Brawl, but then they did it with SSB4 with Dr. Mario, Lucina, and Dark Pit. I've kept the Echo Fighters. The only one I cut was Chrom because the character he's echoing has been cut, so there's no reason to include Chrom at this point, so there you go. I also originally planned on cutting Squirtle and Ivysaur, but I ultimately decided against it. I thought it'd be weird to include 2 fire starters, but only 1 water starter and 1 grass starter, so I decided to just bring back Squirtle and Ivysaur to round out the characters to 100. My original roster, I'll actually show that here, without the Echoes and without Squirtle and Ivysaur, and having Charizard as a standalone character, had 91 playable characters. So I added the 7 Echo Fighters from Ultimate. I added Shadow as an Echo from Sonic, bringing the total to 98 characters, and then I decided just to round out the roster to 100 to bring back Squirrel and Ivysaur and bring back the Pokemon Trainer. And the only reason the Pokemon Trainer was cut in SSB4 was because the limitations of the 3DS for SSB4, and that was also why Zelda and Sheik were made separate characters, and why Samus and Zero Suit Samus were made separate characters, which I ultimately think was a good thing. I think they work better as separate characters. As for the characters I did end up actually cutting, I cut Dr. Mario, Pichu, Young Link, and Roy because I felt like they were just they're clones. I don't feel like they really bring anything to the table. Dr. Mario, I think, works but would be better as just have him as a costume for Mario. We really don't need Dr. Mario. Pichu is by far the least popular character in Melee. I don't feel like anybody was really clamoring for him to come back for any Smash Brothers game. The only reason he was brought back was because of Everyone Is Here. Bring back every single character in Smash's history and Ultimate. Now that probably won't be the case, and it's not the case on my roster, I don't see a reason to bring back Pichu. He brings virtually nothing to the table. Young Link, kind of the same deal. I feel like he's redundant. We've already got Link and Toon Link. We don't need 3 Links. As for Roy, for me personally, I feel like there are better Fire Emblem characters than Roy, more popular Fire Emblem characters. I also want to cut down on the Fire Emblem roster, which even though Fire Emblem is a lot bigger than it was a decade ago, before Awakening came out, it was still a very small series. I don't think Fire Emblem needs as many characters as Super Mario or Zelda or Pokemon, so I cut it down to 6 characters, didn't have room for Roy. And as for Piranha Plant was a joke character in SSBU. I don't see a point in bringing him back. Don't get me wrong, he is a fun character to play as, but I really don't see a reason to bring him back. I'm just cutting him to make room for other characters. So as for Corrin, why I cut Corrin, so when it came down to it, I was going to include 6 Fire Emblem characters, have 6 Fire Emblem slots. Obviously, I feel like Marth, Ike, and Robin are set at this point. I don't see them going anywhere. So that's 3 slots there. I also wanted to reserve one slot for the newest Fire Emblem protagonist, and a character slot for kind of a legacy character, a very popular Fire Emblem character that isn't really recent, isn't really new, but is very iconic and very popular, which left only 1 slot left, and that was between Corrin and Byleth. And ultimately I went with Byleth mainly because between Fire Emblem Fates, which is Corrin's game, and Fire Emblem Three Houses, which is Byleth's game, Fire Emblem Three Houses is simply the more popular game. It's much more popular. Three Houses critically did a lot better, sales-wise did a lot better. Fire Emblem Fates, especially within the Fire Emblem fan base, is one of the least popular Fire Emblem games. People just continue to harp on it to this day. So ultimately, I just feel like Byleth is the more popular character, hence why I kept Byleth. And I feel like Byleth has a more unique moveset, has more going for him. So that's why I kept Byleth. So as for newcomers, here's my criteria, and I feel like Source Gaming does a good job explaining why characters get selected, and what my criteria is pretty similar to that. I would definitely recommend watching Source Gaming's why characters were included in Super Smash Brothers. I've mainly included iconic, popular characters, newer characters, relevant characters, looking at moveset potential, and as well as feasibility as a playable character. So that's what all I took into account, including when I included the various newcomers on my roster. Starting with the Mario series, the first one we have is Captain Toad. Toad obviously has a long history within the Mario series. He's playable in many of the mainline games, whether Super Mario Bros. 2 or Doki Doki Mario, as I and a lot of other people like to call it, Super Mario 3D World, New Super Mario Bros. Wii, New Super Mario Bros. U. But obviously I'm including Captain Toad, who first appeared in Super Mario Galaxy as kind of a side character and then had a mini game in Mario 3D World, and obviously has his own game in Captain Toad Treasure Tracker. Captain Toad is highly requested, he's popular, he's definitely relevant. He's obviously one of the most popular requested Mario characters. The next character I have is Paper Mario, and Paper Mario is actually my most wanted Mario newcomer at this point. I love the Paper Mario games. At least the first 2. Never really got into Super Paper Mario or the follow-ups. Obviously, he's very popular, very relevant. We're still getting new Paper Mario games every seemingly every console since the Wii, has a lot of moveset potential. The funny thing about Paper Mario, for me personally, as much as I liked Paper Mario, and this is going back to the SSB4 speculation days, the reason I would never include Paper Mario is because I felt like, well, he's just another version of Mario. He's the same person. I don't want two Marios in the game. Of course, that was thrown out the window once Zelda and Sheik were separated into two separate character slots, and Samus and Zero Suit Samus were made into two separate characters. So at that point, to me, it didn't really matter whether Paper Mario was just the same person as Mario or not. Well, the funny thing is, as it turns out, as it's since been revealed in Mario & Luigi Paper Jam, Paper Mario is not the same Mario as the main Mario. Paper Mario is his own separate character. The Paper Mario games are their own separate timeline from the mainline Mario games. Me personally, I feel like the Mario & Luigi games are a separate timeline from the main Mario games, but that's neither here nor there. There's really no reason not to include Paper Mario. He has plenty of moveset potential, very popular, very highly requested, by far my most wanted Mario character. Going over the Donkey Kong series, obviously the next character to include is Dixie Kong. Dixie Kong has been at pretty much almost every Donkey Kong Country game since Donkey Kong Country 2. She was the main character in Donkey Kong Country 3. She was in Donkey Kong Country Tropical Freeze. Obviously a very iconic Donkey Kong character, very highly requested. A lot of people include her as a potential Echo fighter for Diddy Kong. I've included her as a fully fledged newcomer with her own moveset, as opposed to being an echo of Diddy Kong. I think Dixie Kong has enough to make her unique from Diddy Kong. I could also see them going the semi-clone route, similar to how Isabelle is a semi-clone to Villager, as opposed to being an echo of Villager. You know, obviously she has her hair, helicopter thing. She doesn't have a tail, so she wouldn't be able to echo Diddy in that regard, where Diddy has a move that uses his tail. Dixie wouldn't be able to do that. So I feel like there's enough to make her unique. As for the Zelda series, I think Zelda is due for an actual newcomer that's not just another version of Link's Zelda or Ganondorf. I'm getting really fucking tired of only getting new versions of Link. We really haven't gotten a new Zelda character since Brawl, and even then, Toon Link was essentially replacing Young Link. Before they separated Zelda and Sheik, ultimately they brought back Young Link. We need a actual new Zelda character. It is so ridiculous that we have only gotten different versions of Link and Zelda. We need a new, unique Zelda newcomer. And of course, my first Zelda newcomer is Tetra, which is just another version of Zelda. Now, don't worry, obviously I have a couple more Zelda newcomers. Tetra for me is of the three, Tetra is kind of my lowest priority among the Zelda newcomers I've added, which is a huge part of both Wind Waker and Phantom Hourglass. I don't remember if Tetra was in Spirit Tracks or not. But obviously she's iconic enough to be included in Hyrule Warriors Legends, very recognizable, so I included her. Definitely plenty of moveset potential. Impa, I think, is easily the next Zelda character that should be included. Has been included in many recent mainline Zelda games as well as spin-off. Impa is the most recurring Zelda character that isn't part of the Triforce trio. She's appeared in a number of Zelda games in a variety of roles, whether she's Zelda's caretaker. She doesn't fight in every single game, but she has a combat role in Ocarina of Time and Skyward Sword. She was playable in both Hyrule Warriors and Hyrule Warriors Age of Calamity. Has plenty of moveset potential. She's playable in Cadence of Hyrule. So I think if there's a new Zelda character that needs to be added, it's Impa. And then I have Skull Kid. Obviously, Skull Kid's not as recurring as Impa. He's not a particularly recurring character. Obviously, very iconic, highly requested. Majora's Mask, easily one of the most popular Zelda games. Skull Kid with the Majora's Mask is very recognizable. A lot of moveset potential. He's been included in many recent spin-offs over other characters. The fact that he was playable in Cadences of Hyrule over other popular Zelda characters like Midna or Tetra, etc., etc., etc. or even Tingle, who's also a recurring Zelda character. If there's another character to add, aside from Impa, it's Skull Kid. My priority list with the Zelda is that Impa has the highest priority, Skull Kid is the next highest, and then Tetra. Of course, not everybody's gonna feel the same way. You, the viewers who are watching this, might feel like another character is more prominent, or maybe Midna is more important than Skull Kid. At the end of the day, it really doesn't matter. I just think the Zelda franchise is due for another full-fledged newcomer that is not another version of Link, Zelda, or Ganondorf. So I didn't include a Star Fox newcomer. Star Fox, they did have Star Fox Zero, but it's looking like Star Fox is kind of going back into hiatus. I'm not sure if there's ever going to be another Star Fox game after the lackluster reception that Star Fox Zero got. I've included Takamaru as a retro miscellaneous character. Takamaru, I think, would be a very fun character to add. I think he would have gotten into Ultimate had they gone kind of the traditional route of not doing everybody is here, but cutting characters and then adding newcomers. I think Takamaru was definitely getting close to being added. He's been an assist trophy in both SSB4 and Ultimate. I think he is definitely due for a Smash Brothers playable appearance. When going over the Metroid series, so I added Sylux from Metroid Prime Hunters. I admit Sylux is a bit of a dark horse. He hasn't had a real appearance since Metroid Prime Hunters, but I do have a hunch, and a lot of people have a hunch, that he will appear in Metroid Prime 4. But I think he'd definitely be a fun character to play as. Has a lot of moveset potential. I'm hoping he appears in Metroid Prime 4, but whenever Metroid Prime 4 does come out, and it probably will come out before the next Smash game, but if he's not in it, I'll probably take him off the roster and put a different character in there. But for now, Sylux is my choice for a Metroid newcomer. Didn't add an F-Zero rep. There has been no new F-Zero game since F-Zero Climax on the Game Boy Advance, and that didn't even see a release outside of Japan. So, and as for Kirby, this is a character I've definitely eaten crow on. I've added Bandana Waddle Dee. He's been recurring, he's relevant, he's been in I think almost every single Kirby game since Kirby Return to Dreamland. And I've definitely eaten crow on this guy, because back in 2011, 2012, a lot of people started putting Bandana Waddle Dee on their rosters after he appeared in Return to Dreamland, was playable in Return to Dreamland, and I told somebody that they were delusional if they thought Bandana Waddle Dee was going to become a recurring character just because he made one playable appearance. Man, was I wrong, and he's been playable, appeared in almost every single Kirby game, at least in a cameo role, and he's appeared in several as the fourth playable character for co-op and multiplayer. He was playable in Kirby Star Allies. He had a big role in Kirby and the Forgotten Land. He's playable in Kirby Fighters 2, I think it was. Definitely a lot of moveset potential. He's so recurring at this point. He is the only character I'm 99.9% will appear in the game, just because he's been so consistent, and I think will continue to be consistent, whereas other characters, it really depends on when the game comes out. So I'm 99% certain on Bandana Waddle Dee, and I never thought I'd be saying that. 10 years ago, I would have called you crazy if I thought he would be a lock for Smash Brothers. And as for Xenoblade Chronicles, obviously I kept Shulk and Pyramithra. I've added Mio from Xenoblade Chronicles 3. Mio is one of the two main protagonists in Xenoblade 3. There's two main protagonists, Noah and Mio. And ultimately I picked Mio mainly because I think Mio has more moveset potential than Noah. Noah, I'm sure you could come up with a unique moveset with him, but he is another sword wielder similar to Shulk and Rex. Mio wields two rings, and that's not something we really have in Smash Brothers yet. I think Mio brings more to the table than Noah. I didn't pick a new Kid Icarus rep, I just kept it as is. We haven't had a new Kid Icarus game since Kid Icarus Uprising, and that will probably remain the case. As for Fire Emblem, I already talked about earlier why I kept the characters that I kept: Marth, Ike, Robin, and Byleth. Originally I had cut Lucina, but then I re-added her once I decided to keep Echo Fighters. So I have two newcomers, the first one being Alear, the main protagonist and the avatar character from the upcoming Fire Emblem Engage. Alear will likely end up being a placeholder because we very well could get another Fire Emblem character before SSB6 releases. But for now, I have Alear in there as the most recent main protagonist. And then as for the last Fire Emblem character slot, I mentioned earlier that I wanted a legacy character. And I feel like Lyn is arguably the most popular and iconic Fire Emblem character other than Marth. She was included as a playable character in Fire Emblem Warriors, I think, solely because of just how iconic she is. Fire Emblem Warriors primarily included characters from Shadow, Dragon, Awakening, and Fates. Yet they still included Lyn, even though her game wasn't really being represented in Warriors. And I think that's solely because of how iconic she is, and she is by far one of the most wanted Fire Emblem newcomers. She was the most popular requested aside from Ike for Brawl. She was still very popular in the speculation scene in the SSB4 days, and I think she has a lot of moveset potential, so I welcome Lyn. I don't know if this is the philosophy they'll go by. They could just decide to only include the new main protagonist and not go back and include Lyn, but you know, this is my roster. I want to include a legacy character for Fire Emblem. I think Lyn is very popular, and I would love to see her be playable in Smash Brothers. And then for Splatoon, still have the Inkling. I didn't add any new Splatoon characters. I know a lot of people like the Octoling, which I admit Octoling is pretty likely with the popularity of Splatoon 3. And Splatoon will continue to get sequels most likely in the years to come. I just haven't added Octoling to my roster, although I think Octoling is likely. No new Mother/Earthbound characters. Going on to Pokemon, the one thing you'll notice is that I do have a total of 10 Pokemon characters, which is one more than the Mario series and 2 more than the Zelda series. Some people might take issue with that, with things not being balanced, but considering that Pokemon I believe the biggest media franchise in the world, I don't think it hurts to have a couple more Pokemon characters than Mario and Zelda. Brand new Pokemon rep, I've included Meowscarada, the final grass starter evolution from Pokemon Scarlet and Violet. I feel like of the 3 starters, for one, we don't have a final grass evolution, and also I don't feel like Fuecoco's final evolution is feasible as a playable character, and I feel like Quaquaval is fairly similar to Greninja. So I've included Meowscarada as a Gen 9 rep. Meowscarada will most definitely end up being a placeholder because at the rate that Pokemon games come out, unless Nintendo decides to slow down, which in my opinion they should slow down a bit, we most likely will be in Generation 10 by the time of SSB6, if not Generation 11. But for now I have Meowscarada, who I think is the most feasible out of the final starter evolutions from Scarlet and Violet. And I didn't forget Olimar this time. I have Olimar on my roster. Going further down, I still have the Wii Fit trainer, still have Villager and Isabelle. Don't see a reason to get rid of either of them, but don't really see any reason to add another Animal Crossing character. I think we've got Animal Crossing covered. Still got Min Min, obviously still have Ice Climbers, still have Duck Hunt. And then the last Nintendo first or second party character I've included is Sukapon from Joy Mech Fight. I was glad to see Sukapon as an assist trophy in Smash Ultimate. I would love to see Sukapon as a playable character, as kind of the retro WTF character. Can't really think of any other possible WTF characters.